The discussion paper that I circulated to you is not meant to articulate a theory of design. And in my presentation tonight, I had 15 and 8 minutes respectively. So I concentrated on a world-class puzzle, namely orphans. It deserves a lot more attention than it's receiving. But if I had 3 hours and your patience, I would take you through the lines of evidence in biology from molecular all the way through paleontological, anatomical, you name it, where patterns have emerged in discovery within evolutionary theory that are fundamentally inconsistent with not only the theory that's in the textbooks, but in fact the theory that I myself learned as a graduate student in Chicago. Let me give you one example of this kind of anomaly. It's deep. It's not a superficial kind of puzzle. Invertebrates, classical anatomy makes the gut, the passage from your mouth to your anus, is homologous in all vertebrates. It's the same structure in terms of evolution. It arose once in evolutionary history in the vertebrates, and all subsequent vertebrates inherited that gut. It turns out, though, that when you look at the embryology of the gut, the path during development to the gut in different groups is about as different as it can be. So somehow, the same anatomical structure was conserved in vertebrates, and yet the developmental pathways are strikingly different depending on the taxon that one looks at. This kind of pattern actually was something I treated in my dissertation. It pops up over and over and over in biology, where you have incongruent levels. I would totally disagree with what Sahotra said, that there's some kind of consilience of induction from the patterns of evidence in biology. In case after case, a new puzzle is put on the shelf to be solved later. How is it possible to conserve adult morphology and have developmental pathways diverge so they're almost unrecognizable? So, what's a design approach? A design approach would say, what you want is a tube that will extract nutrients from food. It'll have certain functional properties, have a length and a surface that will, an epithelial surface that will allow you to extract nutrients. But given the freedom of the designer, there's no constraint on the path by which that structure is built. Design adds explanatory options to an otherwise impoverished naturalistic toolkit. And again, I would say, the reason people don't use it is not because of the evidence. It has nothing to do with the evidence. It has to do with a philosophical rule. Thank you.
Quick question on my panelists, but I'd actually like to follow up with Lori for a second. This is a quick question, I think. I mean, you say that it would be a waste of time for someone to expend their energies in this kind of a program. But if a scientist wants to waste his time thinking about this and trying to develop something that could become a testable paradigm, that would be permissible, right? In fact, that would be salutary, to say.
I don't know about salutary, but certainly permissible. I mean, I'm certainly not for, I don't think anyone's for disallowing people from wasting their time in all sorts of ways.
Let me actually follow up real quickly, too, with Paul. I wonder if there is a problem in the debate so far of a false dilemma or false dichotomy between Darwinian theory on one hand and intelligent agency on the other hand. I mean, historically, there have been many positions in between those two. Positions of some sort of immanent teleology, let's say, going back to Aristotle himself, to Richard Owens and others. I mean, even looking at it from the broad perspective, not just in the last 100 years or so, but broadly, it would seem, doesn't it, that science has been able to progress by looking for natural processes, even if those are teleological, as opposed to something that would involve the supernatural, so to speak. And I wonder if you would agree with this, that the one possible direction an idea could take would be for the intelligent designer, this agent, in a sense to drop out of the theory altogether, to become merely heuristic. And the theory ultimately to end up with a form of law which was purely immanent, which could be tested in the laboratories, as we heard Sean.
Rob, I'm wide open to that, if it would work. But I think with biological entities, you face certain hurdles. Gene sequences are informationally incompressible. You can't generate them by any algorithm. No finite algorithm will generate for you the yeast third chromosome. Sahotra and I were talking about this last night. The yeast third chromosome, that is the signal frequency from one nucleotide to the next along that coding sequence, all the open reading frames in the yeast third chromosome, is more irregular than a Beethoven sonata or Alice in Wonderland. There are more regularities in musical notation and natural language than there are in that coding, in the coding sequence of that chromosome, yet we know that the genes on that chromosome code for functional proteins. So if you want to have a law, which I take to be something that you can write as an equation or an algorithm that will generate patterns for you, it's going to be a very strange law indeed that would generate that much irregularity. Jacques Monod saw this 30 years ago. There are codes, there is information, apologies to Sahotra, who doesn't like that word, in living things. And the kinds of laws that we know, I think, are not, in principle, capable of generating that. Agents are. Here's what I would want from a design theory that cannot yet provide. What I would want are predictions that, as Sahotra pointed out, are surprising and novel and would not come from evolution. Otherwise, why bother? Why bother? My exhortation to you is really an appeal to preserve your intellectual freedom, and when a philosopher of science tells you to do something, tell him to take a hike. Keep your intellectual freedom, it's the most precious thing you have, and if you're curious about a possibility, treat it gingerly, and don't rule it out because of a rule that we inherited from people in sepia-toned photographs. Thank you.
What we're going to do now is moving into a session where audience members will be able to ask questions of the debaters. Let me briefly go over how we're going to do this. Audience members will be able to pose a single question to either Dr. Sarkar, Dr. Nelson, or Dr. Wimsatt. We have 3 microphones set up, one to each side of the stage and one in the middle. If you'd like to pose a question to Dr. Wimsatt, you should go to the microphone in the middle. If you'd like to pose a question to Dr. Sarkar, the microphone over here to my left, in front of his podium. And if you'd like to pose a question to Dr. Nelson, please go to the microphone over here to the right.